Welcome to the Bible Forum. It's Sunday night, February 2nd, 2020. We're going to take a look at the political scene as it shows itself this week. Democrat presidential candidate Senator Bernie Sanders, who says he's an independent from Vermont but running on the Democrat ticket, has some extreme staffers in the field running his campaign. I'm shocked. And the latest release from Project Veritas further demonstrates that those radical views, the views that underlie the Sanders candidacy. This time, undercover video from James O'Keefe's organization showed two South Carolina field organizers for the Sanders campaign, someone by the name of Mason Baird and Daniel Taylor, apparently suggesting that eventually violence and force will be needed to enact the type of future that Sanders envisions. Picture that. The President of the United States, Bernie Sanders, advocating underneath and roundabout violence in order to get his way. Baird said, "I've canvassed with someone who's an anarchist and with someone who's a Marxist-Leninist. So we attract radical, truly radical people in the campaign. Obviously, that's not outward facing," he said, meaning for public consumption. But like other Sanders staffers, Baird said the American understanding of Soviet gulags is not accurate and that the perception of them has been negatively exaggerated. Right now, Taylor says the Sanders campaign needs to keep its more radical leanings under wraps so they can attract people to the cause and ease them in gradually. We don't want to scare people off. You also have to feel it out before you get into the crazy stuff, he said. You know, we were talking about more extreme organizations like Antifa. You were talking about yellow vests and all that. But we're kind of keeping that on the back burner for now. So what is it exactly that needs to be on the back burner? Apparently the plan for a revolution to end capitalism in America, according to Baird. When pressed on how the Bernie Sanders movement would convince major companies like Google, YouTube, or Facebook to cede power and wealth and be nationalized, Baird, who repeatedly expressed a hesitancy to participate in violence toward other people, suggested that the escalation would need to involve a show of force and the destruction of property to force opponents to back off their position. Can't you picture your federal government blowing up an Amazon warehouse? Quote, "We would need a federal government and a labor movement that's working together to strip power away from capitalists and preferably directing that violence toward property," Baird said in the video. It's going to take militancy, like a militant labor movement that's willing to strike if necessary, just destroy property and things like that. On another note, over in Malibu, that's in California, the National Association of Scholars held a half-day conference at Pepperdine University just last week to defend the need to teach young people about the vast accomplishments of Western civilization, saying the effort would not only correct the fallacious curriculum prevalent in schools today, but also reignite the common cause of freedom and liberty among Americans. Keynote speaker was Dr. Stanley Kurtz, and he said, quote, "Here is the deeper reason why the rising American generation is losing liberty. Liberty in the bones is lost when the story of the West is forgotten." The centerpiece of the conference was the release of a new report authored by Kurtz entitled "The Lost History of Western Civilization." It seeks to rectify the excesses of 4 decades of history and cultures, ideas, and values. Kurtz excavates the history of thought from Jerusalem and Athens through Rome to the modern West. In doing so, Kurtz provides a detailed refutation of Western civilization, the myth, and explains the need for Western civilization courses from Stanford to Yale. During his speech, Farley Kurtz recalled the infamous protest at Stanford University in January 1987, at which students, led by Jesse Jackson, chanted, "Hey, hey, ho, ho, Western culture's got to go." 32 years ago, he said, the campus culture wars were a riveting sight. Today, they have become our politics. He also traced the source of contemporary hostility toward the teaching of Western civilization to John Lennon's 1971 song, "Imagine," that implied the world would eventually turn into a secular society with no borders, no history. Kurtz said one goal of progressive scholars is to undermine the public sense of national or civilization identity. With nothing left to kill or die for, the world will live as one. He went on to say, is it possible to simply imagine a nation or even an entire civilization out of existence? Well, that's exactly what deconstructivist historians attempt to do. According to Kurtz, the Western tradition is the source of America's founding principles and constitutional system, yet over the last few decades, almost every familiar narrative of Western history has been subjected to debunking by revisionist historians. The decision to eliminate Stanford University's required Western civilization course came to usher in the modern era of multiculturalism at our universities and greatly accelerated the disappearance of Western civilization courses from the American college curriculum, according to Kurtz. He says the scholars most responsible for moving today's K through 12 curriculum away from Western history and toward the idea of global citizenship have also been deeply influenced by the claim that the teaching and the very idea of Western civilization was actually a form of 20th century war propaganda. He criticized celebrated scholar Gilbert Allardyce's thesis that Western civilization is both a recent invention and a thinly disguised form of neo-imperial war propaganda. Don't you love it? These are two sides of our world. One is pushing us over the edge, and the other is trying to convince us that the stability that brought us what we have was all wrong. What do you think children are going to believe in the next generation? My children have grandchildren. That's 1, 2, 3 generations in my family. Maybe 4. That's how far we've come. What we're talking about now has all taken place during my children's era. That's fast. This thing is already ramped up. It is fully formed. It now has a history and is barreling forward with the likes of Bernie Sanders and most of those that are running for president under the Democrat banner. And the vast majority of those are not Democrats. They're anarchists and the like, but they're in the Democrat Party. To a large extent because in my generation, my lifetime, the Democrat Party has become radicalized. And I believe that they have become radicalized because they are pushing against the grain. They're trying to make something a reality that everybody knows in their heart doesn't make sense. And the only way to do that, they tried rational discussion, but they were destroyed at every turn. The only way to do that is to get out there and throw a bunch of crazies to the wind and see what they'll do. We saw it during the impeachment thing. Democrats brought no charges. They came to the Senate and let history or circumstance or news items or just things that were said there, because, oh, we'll do that, oh, we'll do that. And they started putting those in and wondered why the senators wouldn't then fill in the gaps they left and continue with this. It was a high level farce on every level. And the American people saw it. All the TV and radio and all the news people are complaining. Nobody was watching it. I think less than 20% paid any attention to it. That's our world. Did we make it that way? Did my children do that? Did yours? Did their children do any of that? And how are they raising their children? That's what it's about, isn't it? Not long.